Guys, welcome to Operation Free Thinkers. Before I delve into what you guys came for, I just wanted to give a quick introduction as this is my very first video. So I've been doing some research on my own for quite some time now and noticed a lot of trends. One trend being there is a very particular narrative that our politicians, pharmaceutical companies, and unfortunately many of our health officials want us to accept at face value. So you would think that these people would look out for the public's best interest, but many are choosing to stay silent as many important questions go unanswered in regards to the vaccine. So anyone that questions the main narrative, despite using science, their own critical thinking skills, let alone just their brain, they are often silenced or ridiculed. I cannot cover everything in just one video, but today I wanted to highlight some key parts of the ongoing discussion about the FDA's approval of Pfizer's vaccine. So as you already know, the unvaxxed are at risk of losing their jobs. Students who want to go back to school are required to get vaccinated. And now that the president is requiring vaccine mandates, I think going back and revisiting the FDA's decision for FDA approval is important more than ever. So I'm just an average Jane sharing some things I've come across during my research, and honestly, only a handful will probably watch my video. But I still felt the need to try to do my part in getting people to realize that there are conversations happening out there that don't sound anything like you have to go get the vaccine, and that it's the magic bullet for all of our problems. So with that being said, let's just delve right in. So the first paper I want to bring to your attention is written by Dr. Peter Doshi, who is the senior editor of BMJ. So despite it being an opinion piece, it is very thought-provoking and raises a lot of good points. So I actually came across this article for the first time while watching Dr. Suneel Dhand's video, and he actually has his own YouTube channel. I would highly recommend you to go check it out. And unfortunately, YouTube has been trying to censor his videos. And so you know that he has some great content. So we'll just be going over snippets of this paper and break it down together. So first up, while the preprint is new, the results it contains aren't particularly up to date. In fact, the paper is based on the same data cutoff date, 13th of March 2021, as the 1st of April press release. The 20-page preprint matters because it represents the most detailed public account of the pivotal trial data Pfizer submitted in pursuit of the world's first approval of a coronavirus vaccine from the FDA. It deserves careful scrutiny. I agree, it definitely does deserve careful scrutiny. And it is quite unfortunate that we have to rely on overseas publications like the BMJ to give us honest critiques of a vaccine that we made. So let me also point out that this is an unrefereed preprint. So essentially that means that it has yet to be evaluated before it is peer-reviewed and should not be used as clinical guidance. And this definition is from source 2. All the sources I have used and will be mentioning in my video will be linked in the description section below. So I strongly encourage everyone to take the time out to take a look at all the sources for yourself. So as you already know, the number we have been drilled into our heads from day one is the 95% vaccine efficacy rate. However, it's actually really interesting because Dr. Doshi wrote a separate article, which is source 3 right here, outlining his concerns about the trustworthiness and meaningfulness of the reported efficacy results. So for example, 371 individuals were excluded from the efficacy analysis for important protocol deviations on or prior to 7 days after dose 2. What is concerning is the imbalance between randomized groups and the number of these excluded individuals, 311 from the vaccine group versus 60 in the placebo. So you can see in the table here, this is the vaccine group and this is the placebo group. There's 5 times more people from the vaccinated group than the control that are excluded. Now, what these deviations were, we have no idea, as Pfizer and the FDA report doesn't specify this on page 18 of source 1, which is the FDA memorandum. Next, we have the unofficial unblinding. Last month, I expressed concern about the potential confounding role of pain and fever medications to treat symptoms. I posited that such drugs could mask symptoms, leading to underdetection of COVID-19 cases, possibly in greater numbers in people who received the vaccine in an effort to prevent or treat adverse events. So again, from source 1, page 37, you can see in the table that the vaccine group is 3 to 4 times more likely than the placebo group to take pain and fever medications. Given the vaccine's reactogenicity, it's hard to imagine participants and investigators could not make educated guesses about which group they were in. The primary endpoint in the trials is relatively subjective, making unblinding an important concern. Yet neither FDA nor the company seem to have formally probed the reliability of the blinding procedure and its effects on the reported outcomes. Now, as you already know, having a placebo control group is absolutely crucial in clinical trials, let alone just any scientific study. But I'll read you a quote by Dr. Philip Cross, who, interestingly enough, is one of the 2 FDA board members, along with Dr. Marion Gruber, who recently resigned due to disagreeing with the current administration's handling and decision to push booster shots. So I'll quickly add here that when it comes to these third shots or the booster shots, you're essentially the guinea pig. The CDC director herself admitted it is based on hope and not data, since there's been no research done on the safety or effectiveness of it. So back to Dr. Cross's quote. And very often it's the fact that we have that placebo-controlled follow-up over time that gives us the ability to say that the vaccine didn't cause something at a longer period of time after vaccination. In other words, the control or placebo arm is what can show the vaccine may have caused something or that it may have not. So this trial property is absolutely vital. And Dr. Doshi makes a great point that we may be losing this crucial information when we don't talk about how unblinding could affect the reported outcomes. Third, there's the process of the primary event adjudication committee that counted COVID-19 cases. Were they blinded to antibody data and information on patient symptoms in the first week after vaccination? What criteria did they employ, and why, with the primary event consisting of a patient-reported outcome and PCR test result, was such a committee even necessary? It's also important to understand who was on these committees. While Moderna has named its 4-member adjudication committee, all university-affiliated physicians, Pfizer's protocol says 3 Pfizer employees did the work. Now, if this isn't an example of conflict of interest, I don't know what is. So what we just went over is from the article where Dr. Doshi talks about his thoughts on the vaccine efficacy rate. From here on out, we will cover his article about information included in the preprint that was used for Pfizer's BLA application. So first up is waning immunity. So the concern, of course, was decreased efficacy over time. Waning immunity is a known problem for influenza vaccines, with some studies showing near zero effectiveness after just 3 months, meaning a vaccine taken early may ultimately provide no protection by the time flu season arrives some months later. If vaccine efficacy wanes over time, the crucial question becomes, what level of effectiveness will the vaccine provide when a person is actually exposed to the virus? So the FDA actually states that a follow-up duration of at least 2 months after full vaccination is required to provide adequate information to assess a vaccine's benefit risk analysis. And that's exactly what happened. Pfizer waited for the minimum amount of time, which honestly is going to say very little about the vaccine efficacy. So it's actually not at all surprising that to see by early July, the rate dropped to 64% and then 39% by late July. Additionally, from the preprint on page 7, there is evidence of waning immunity already visible by the data cutoff date, which is 13th of March, 2021. It goes from 96% to 90%, then to 84%. So there's an average decline of 6% every 2 months. And Dr. Doshi actually highlights that this data was available to Pfizer in April, but the preprint was not published until July. And if you recall, many were blaming the drop in efficacy rate due to the rise in Delta cases. However, you can clearly see in the preprint that waning immunity was seen way before Delta was even established. So in the end, it's actually unclear whether the 2-dose series even meets the FDA approval standard at 6 or 9 months, considering the approval was given in August. And let me also remind you that an EUA requires a 50% efficacy rate. That's what the FDA had promised us. At this rate, the vaccine doesn't even reach the minimum requirements for an EUA. So how does this get FDA approval? I'm actually not sure. Apparently rules don't matter anymore. Next, the 6-month preprint based on the 7% of trial participants who remained blinded at 6 months. So the final efficacy time point reported in Pfizer's preprint is from 4 months to the data cutoff. The confidence interval here is wider than earlier time points because only half of trial participants, 53%, made it to the 4-month mark, and mean follow-up is around 4.4 months. So let me start off by saying, beginning last December, Pfizer actually entered an open label follow-up as those in the placebo arm was offered the option to get vaccinated. So by the data cutoff date, 93% were unblinded. By mid-April, 98% of the placebo arm in Moderna's trials were vaccinated as well. So at this point, we completely lost the control group, and we already discussed the repercussions of that earlier in the video. Dr. Doshi also brings up a great point about how, despite the title here saying 6-month safety and efficacy, the paper unfortunately reports efficacy up to 6 months, but not from 6 months. Despite the preprint appearing a year after trials began, there is no vaccine efficacy data past 6 months. And this is an important time frame to remember because Israel had demonstrated that this is a time frame or the time point when vaccine efficacy drops all the way down to as low as 39%. So like Dr. Doshi states, how only 7% of trial participants who remain blinded at 6 months constitutes a reliable or valid sample is quite mind-boggling. Now let's talk about severe disease. With the US awash in news about rising cases of the Delta variant, including among the fully vaccinated, the vaccine's efficacy profile is in question. But some medical commentators are delivering an upbeat message. Former FDA Commissioner Scott Gottlieb, who is on Pfizer's board, said, remember the original premise behind these vaccines were that they would substantially reduce the risk of death and severe disease and hospitalization. And that was the data that came out of the initial clinical trials. So if you think back to a few months ago, there were headlines about how the vaccines aren't as effective anymore, but it is 99% effective. This is just one example, but 99% effective in preventing serious disease and death. However, this is misleading because these trials were not designed to study serious outcomes such as severe disease, hospital admissions, ICUs, or deaths. Right here. You can see in this table, these trials were not testing for any of these. So first, let's talk about what constitutes as an event. So source 13, this is a conversation between Dr. Eric Topol and Dr. Paul Offit. People thought an event in these trials would be moderate to severe cases of COVID. And Dr. Offit, who is on the FDA advisory committee, confirmed this, but in source 13. But when you look at the Pfizer protocol, cases with minor and mild symptoms of COVID were counted as an event since all you needed was a positive COVID test. Now, the reason for this could be because of numbers. Severe illness to the point of requiring hospital admission is unlikely to occur in these trials. Even trials with 30,000 plus subjects turn up relatively few severe disease cases. Now, CDC themselves even says most experience mild symptoms. FDA also states a larger number of individuals at high risk of COVID-19 and higher attack rates would be needed to confirm efficacy of the vaccine against mortality. Now here in source 16, Pfizer states this is all preliminary evidence on efficacy against severe disease, while Moderna, source 17, states their vaccine is likely to have an effect on preventing severe illness, which is the major cause of healthcare utilization, complications, and death. Let me also remind you that the subjects in these trials were healthy individuals. Notable excluded populations: children and adolescents, immunocompromised patients, pregnant or breastfeeding women, they were all excluded in these trials. So we do not know how effective these vaccines are against COVID for those who are immunocompromised or those at high risk. So the fact that we are pushing these vaccines on people who are, especially on people who are immunocompromised and or at high risk, is a little questionable for me. Next, Talzax. is the Moderna chief medical officer, and he says that trials lack statistical power to assess outcomes such as severe disease, hospital admissions, and last but not least, transmission, which many have argued that that is the most important aspect of phase 3 studies. So right here, he says, our trial will not demonstrate prevention of transmission, Zach said, because in order to do that, you have to swab people twice a week for very long periods, and that becomes operationally untenable. For the sake of time, I won't go over the rest of the 2 paragraphs here, but I highly recommend that you pause the video and read the rest, as Zach actually explains really well why certain things can't be tested in trials. Next, the FDA says it won't convene its advisory committee to discuss the data ahead of approving Pfizer's vaccine. So this is from Source 19. I want to read you a couple quotes from here that discusses the repercussions of FDA's decision not to meet. So these public meetings are imperative in building trust and confidence, especially when the vaccines came to market at lightning speed under emergency use authorization. The public deserves a transparent process, especially as the call for boosters and mandates are rapidly increasing. These meetings offer a platform where questions can be raised, problems tackled, and data scrutinized in advance of an approval. So Witzak is one of the more than 30 signatories of a citizen petition calling on the FDA to refrain from fully approving any COVID-19 vaccine this year to gather more data. She warned that without a meeting, we have no idea what the data looks like. It is already concerning that full approval is being based on 6 months worth of data, despite the clinical trials designed for 2 years. There is no control group after Pfizer offered the product to the placebo participants before the trials were completed. Full approval of COVID-19 vaccines must be done in an open public forum for all to see. Now, this is the crucial part. It could set a precedent of lowered standards for future vaccine approvals. So it's not about just now, but it's also about our future vaccine approvals. So with the government already talking about making booster shots available this month, experts say the decision not to meet to discuss the data was politically driven. Now, I have my own opinions on that, but maybe I'll share them sometime in the future in some of my future videos. So in the end, we need more of the raw data. Pfizer says it's making data available upon request and subject to review. This stops far short of making data publicly available, but at least leaves the door open. The study protocol says Pfizer will only start making data available 24 months after study completion. And I checked out clinicaltrials.gov for myself, and it said that the estimated trial completion of their study would be 2nd of May, 2023. Moderna's data sharing statement states data may be available upon request once the trial is complete. This translates to sometime in mid to late 2022, as follow-up is planned for 2 years. So in conclusion, FDA grants marketing license 13 months into the ongoing 2-year pivotal trial with no reported data past 13th of March, 2021. There's unclear efficacy after 6 months due to unblinding, which we already talked about. There's also waning evidence irrespective of the Delta variant. There is limited reporting of safety data. And this was interesting because when you look at table S3, which is part of the supplementary materials, you can see there's information on 1 month follow-up right here for adverse events, adverse events after 2nd dose. However, there is nothing for 6 months. And this is a violation of protocol 9.5.1, which promised us that 6-month safety data will be reported. Now, why it's not reported, I have no idea. I don't know if they were trying to hide something, but the point is they didn't report it. Next, no new biodistribution reports were done, and none of them were done as regulators accepted data from past studies performing with related compounds that use the same technology. And this is from sources 24 through 27. Lastly, the vaccine efficacy was based on 150 to 160 events. And this actually drew a lot of criticism, even by Medscape's Dr. Topol, because you're essentially giving a vaccine to tens of millions of people based off of only 100 events, which is quite small. So honestly, what is the rush? BMJ actually reached out to the pharmaceutical companies about asking like what the benefit would be of FDA granting a BLA. So Moderna actually declined to answer. Janssen said that they will apply for a BLA later in 2021. And Pfizer quoted an FDA webpage on medical devices, which you can see right here. It says, sponsors of EUA products are encouraged to follow up the EUA issuance with a pre-market submission so that their products can remain on the market once the EUA is no longer in effect. But interestingly enough, EUAs actually don't have a built-in expiration date. So when you read this paper, there are 14 EUAs for Zika diagnostic tests that still remain active despite the public health emergency for Zika expiring back in 2017. And this article also covers other examples of EUAs that are still in effect to this day. So I thought about it for myself and came to two conclusions as to what the advantages could be of a BLA. And many others actually came to the same conclusion too. So the possible advantages of a BLA is twofold. One, it is an element of assurance. And second, it affects the potential for vaccine mandates. Now I'll leave you with a quote by Dr. Doshi. Approving a vaccine in order to legally support mandates or convince people of its safety arguably puts the cart before the horse. I'll read this again. Approving a vaccine in order to legally support mandates or convince people of its safety arguably puts the cart before the horse. Now that is one powerful quote that's very applicable in what is going on today. So that is all I have for you today. Thank you so much for tuning in, you guys, and I hope there is at least one thing that you guys learned from my video. So stay safe and stay healthy. Bye.